Hello and welcome to the Introduction to After Effects workshop with Studio Co. My name is Toby and I'll be guiding you through this tutorial today. Before I get started, I want to just talk a little bit about After Effects and what it can do. A lot of people conceive of After Effects as Adobe's one-stop shop because it has the same functionality as many of Adobe's other programs. You can do photo editing as you would in Photoshop, illustrating as you would in Illustrator, and video editing as you would in programs like Premiere. The truth is though that After Effects isn't really built for these features and instead is really designed for three main tasks. The first is basic animation, so that's things like name sliders that you would see in commercials. The second, and probably what it's best known for, is visual effects, which include things like explosions and fireworks in movies, walls crumbling and shattering, those sorts of things. And then also motion graphics, which are basically just intricate shape generation and animation, the sort of things you would see with virtual jogging or VJing. I'm going to be showing you the last one of those today. What we're going to be working on is a simple motion graphics animation loop, which I will play for you guys now. Alright, so you guys get the point. It's basically just that same loop on repeat a couple of times. And we are going to go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is open up After Effects. It takes a while to open, so bear with me. Alright, we can just go ahead and click out of this home screen that pops up. It gives you a few options. If you'd worked in After Effects before, you would also see your recent projects in here, but anything you can do within the home screen, you can do within the main window. So I'm just going to go ahead and click out of this. And now you can see our main workspace in After Effects. This big viewer here is where we're going to actually see the project once we have a composition within it. This is where we'll import media and access our effect controls. As you can see, this panel over here has all of our effect presets. It will also have information that pops up as we move along our compositions. And then down here we have our layers and our timeline. And you'll see what all this does a little more as we work through the tutorial. So let's get started. The first thing I want you guys to do is just click on New Composition. We're going to call this Pre-Comp because eventually we're going to integrate this composition into a different composition, which will be our main comp. We will just get there when we get there. Let's call this one Pre-Comp. The rest of these are okay, except for the duration, which we want to set to 12 seconds. And you can see with the time signature here, it's broken down into hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. And you can change the frame rate up here, but we're going to go with 29.97 because that is standard in the United States. Don't know why they didn't do 30, but it is what it is. So now you can see we have our composition in here. Right now it's just a black background, which we set when we created it. And we're just going to dive right in. The first thing we're going to do is create a new solid layer to work on. So all I did is I right-clicked within my timeline panel, went to New, Solid. The other way to access this is to come up to Layer, New, Solid. This screen will pop up. We can change the color if we'd like. It won't really matter after we apply an effect to it, so I'm just going to keep it as a dark gray solid 1. Now the reason we're just working with a solid layer is because if you want to just sort of get into After Effects and test out some of the effects, one of the best ways to do this is to just work on a solid layer like this one. I will say that a lot of effects in After Effects are meant for pre-recorded video footage, but if you're looking for more generative effects, which are effects that just create animations, create movement, and color from nothing, then a solid fill layer is perfect. So we're going to come in and grab our effect from our effects and presets over here. What we could also do is, with this layer selected, access the effects through this effect panels, but I kind of like working through this space. So we're going to drop down our animation presets. We're going to choose backgrounds, and then we're going to click and drag on red speed and release it on dark gray solid 1. And now you'll see we have this layer. And if we just go ahead and scrub through it, we can see that it plays through the 5-second mark and then stops. And before I explain why that is, or I guess as I explain why that is, we're going to get into the core of After Effects. So most of the animation that you achieve in After Effects revolves around 2 core aspects of the program: parameters and keyframes. So everything you see down here are your parameters, and our effects. When we added this effect, we got this effect drop-down menu, and all of these different aspects of red speed are creating this animation. So you can see when we drop these down further, we get into our actual parameters, such as fractal type, noise type, overflow, complexity. I think there's rotation. We have our colors down here. If we open up our transform, you'll see the really common ones: scale, rotation, opacity. And then you'll see in our timeline these little dots and diamonds, and these are keyframes. So the parameters are pretty self-explanatory. Keyframes come from an old animation term. It comes from classic animation. So the keyframes would be the most important frames in a motion, in any given motion. So for example, if a character leaped, the very bottom point of their crouch would be a keyframe, and the highest point of their jump would be a keyframe. And the keyframe animator would draw all of those, or would draw those 2 keyframes, and then the junior animators would fill in the motion in between. Now we set our keyframes, so you'll see a keyframe here at 0, and keyframes here at 5, and the computer calculates all of the motion in between. So we'll actually want our keyframes, we want our animation to last 10 seconds instead of 5 seconds. So we're going to put our playhead over here at 10 seconds. And you can see if I have trouble dragging it exactly to 10, which I don't, but if you did, you can use page up and page down to move 1 frame at a time. Oh, and that's 10 seconds. Down here. Page up. Perfect. And now, I'm going to show you guys what is probably the most important shortcut in After Effects, which is the letter U, which brings up all of your parameters that are currently keyframed. So if I have this layer selected and I press U, you'll see that the keyframes for all of these layers pop up as diamonds. And what we're going to want to do is click and drag over all of them, and then just click and drag our selection over to 10 seconds. Another important shortcut when working in After Effects is when you hold Shift, your selections will snap to either the playhead or the end of the other clips. So that's why I set my playhead at 10 seconds before moving these. Now I can just hold Shift and it snaps right to it. And now our animation plays over the course of 10 seconds. I'm gonna show you guys a couple of other things while we're in here, just what some of the other parameters within this effect actually do. I'm gonna go ahead and change this dynamic twist fractal type to cloudy. And I'm just gonna use the settings I used for the video that I showed you guys at the beginning for the sake of consistency. But I encourage you, if you're following along with this at home, to really experiment with all of these parameters until you get something that looks good to you. Soft linear is fine for the noise type. And then I'm gonna set my colors underneath. Where is this sucker? The tritone. So I'm gonna change my highlights. I don't know, let's do this blue. Midtones, make orange, a little peachish. And these, the objective best color, purple. Go with this light purple. If you don't like the way this looks, you can play with the other parameters within the effect to change it up a bit. I think in red speed that the rotation alters it quite drastically, as well as the contrast, wherever that is. I'm not going to worry about it too much. There it is. I don't really need to mess with that because I like the way mine looks. And now, when I hit the space bar, which plays and pauses the program, we can see our background animating through. Go ahead, stop that, and we will move on to the next layer. So if you're familiar with other Adobe programs, a lot of them work in layers, which basically operate the way that you'd think they would. So the top layers appear above the bottom layers, and the bottom layers appear below the top layers. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. So I'm gonna import footage, and the best way to do that is to just double click inside of this panel. I'm gonna bring up my Finder. The other way you can import footage is to come up to File, Import, File, and it'll just bring up the same menu. I already have my workshop files open, and I'm just gonna bring in everything that I need right now. So this is our music, our next layer, and visuals. I'm gonna go ahead and hit open, and now you can see all of them in our project panel. Let's go ahead, click and drag anatomy.png into the timeline panel. You can see if I drop it below Gray Solid 1, nothing happens because it is the bottom layer. It appears below this layer and is therefore hidden. But if I click on it, you can see this blue line appears, and now it is our top layer. Alright, so I'm gonna go ahead, make sure my playhead is placed at 0. When you are keyframing and animating, wherever your playhead is placed is where the keyframes will be created, and you'll see what I mean here in a second. I'm gonna make sure this is at 0. And we're gonna drop down our transform parameters. And let's go ahead and create keyframes for position and scale. So an important thing to note, in After Effects, any parameter with this little stopwatch icon is capable of keyframing and is therefore an animatable parameter. I'm going to go ahead to animate this. I'm going to move my playhead to, or actually while I'm at 0, I'm going to change the values of these parameters. And what we want to do is basically just make this, you can also change these parameters by clicking and dragging while I'm doing it in the window, but we're going to make this figure come, expand in size, and move up here so it aligns perfectly with the rest of our animation later. And the way I figured out these numbers earlier is just guessing and testing when I was designing this workshop, which is a lot of what working in After Effects boils down to, just plugging and chugging, playing with the different parameters until you get the effects that you want. So with our playhead here at 0, I'm going to change the position to 970 and 946. I guess also one useful thing to note when working with parameters, the way that you change them, you can either click, hold, and drag left or right, or you can click and enter values manually. I'm going to go ahead and change the scale to 28. And you'll notice when I change the X scale, it changed the Y scale automatically. That's because this parameter is linked. That's what this little chain link here means. And now when I unlink it, you see I can change them independently of one another. We don't want that right now, so I'm going to go ahead, undo that, relink these parameters, and we are good to go. I'm going to go ahead and move my playhead to 6 seconds. And then I'm going to change these parameters to make a little animation happen. Now you'll notice over here, these little diamond icons, you can click on these and that will create a keyframe, but it's good to know that you can also just change the values of any parameters that already have keyframes, and as long as your playhead is on a different frame, it will automatically create a new keyframe. So when I change my position to 768. And 3584. You'll see this keyframe appear automatically. I'm going to change the scale to 330.5. And now you can see our image growing and moving. Perfect. So we're going to keyframe one other parameter here that will help with the animation a little later. You'll probably see it as we add our final layer and really start getting into this workshop. I'm going to go ahead, place my playhead back at 0. Or no, not 0. Place my playhead at 4. Where is it? Oh, page down. And set my opacity to 100, so I'm just going to keyframe this, keep it at 100, and then I'm going to move my playhead to 8 seconds. And set my opacity to 0. Perfect. So we're just going to change one other aspect of this image layer before we move on, and that is its blending mode. So if you're familiar with Photoshop or Premiere, then you're probably familiar with blending modes, which basically just dictate how your top layer will interact with all of the colors in the layers beneath it. And you'll see what I mean when I actually do it. So the way that you access blending modes in After Effects, you'll hit this little toggle switches and modes here. You can see that things like motion blur and 3D layer and all of these, which we will not get into today, disappear and are replaced instead with your track matte, which has to do with masking, which we also won't really get into today, and your mode, which is your blending mode that I just described. So you can see you do things like add, that one's not great. Let's go multiply. You can see how this layer is working with the layers below it. And I'm actually going to do difference because that's closer to what it looked like in the opening video. Perfect. So that does it for our animation layer, or excuse me, for our anatomy layer for now. And now we're going to drag in the last layer of our animation loop, which will be this visuals.mp4 here. I will say that this visuals.mp4 is not my original content. It belongs to Voyager 360 on YouTube. Voyager 360, if by some cosmic coincidence you happen to stumble upon Studio Co's page, please do not sue us. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead, click and drag this one onto the bottom. And let's go ahead, hold on just 1 second. Okay, one thing I forgot to do earlier, I thought so. So this dark gray solid 1 layer, we're only going to want to be 10 seconds long, not the full 12. So I'm going to show you guys how to fix that. Basically, all that you do to trim footage in After Effects is hover over one of the ends until this little icon appears, and then you can just click and drag. I'll hold shift so it snaps to the playhead. Perfect. Y. There we go. Alright, now we can work on our visuals layer. The reason I had to do that is so we could actually see our visuals layer after this 10-second mark. Alright, so we actually also want our visuals layer to be 10 seconds long, so I'm going to go ahead, move the playhead back. We will trim this puppy as well. Oh, let's get out of here. it's actually not letting me trim it with the method that I just showed you because it is longer than the total length of the composition. So if I double click on it, that window that opens up allows me to edit it individually in the project window. And you can see down in the timeline the bar moving as well. So let's go ahead, put this right at 10 seconds. We actually want it to align with the end of our anatomy layer. Cool, then I'm gonna have you guys just go ahead and transform it for obvious reasons, as in it does not fill the entire composition right now. So we're gonna change its scale to 227. And then we're going to change its position so that this dot here will align with our image PNG's, the center of our image, of our anatomy PNG's forehead at the peak of its expansion. And those numbers are 982 and 294. And again, I figured out those numbers before recording this workshop, just by guessing and testing. Perfect, so now I'm gonna show you guys how to work with transitions. So you'll notice that it just cuts directly from a dark gray solid 1 layer to our visuals layer. But in the video, if you'll recall, we had a circle opening up from the middle, revealing the layer below it. And I'm going to show you guys how to achieve that right now. So let's go ahead, grab our dark gray solid 1 layer again, come up here to our effect panel, navigate down to transition, and we are going to use the iris wipe, which will automatically start in the middle of our composition. And we will not change that. Let's go ahead, twirl down effects, or twirl up effects, open it again. Oh, close all of these just so we can see what we're doing. So now you see we have this iris wipe effect also under our effects drop down menu. I'm gonna go ahead, click that one down. And the way that the iris effect works is by basically the main parameter that animates this is its outer radius. So you can see as I increase it, the effect gets larger and larger. So by animating it, we'll go from 0 to a higher number. And before I move on, I'm actually going to change one setting. So up here, you'll see this full. This is our resolution. This means what you see up here is what you will see when you render. We're going to go ahead and move it to quarter. This doesn't affect the render, but you'll notice that our composition just got extremely pixelated. The more complex that your composition gets, the more layers you have, the more animation you have, the slower the program will start to run. And one way to combat that is by changing your active render to a lower sample size. Okay, go ahead, open this back up. We're going to place our playhead at 2 seconds. Yep. And before we animate, and we're going to create a keyframe for the outer radius, but before we animate it, let's set our iris points to the max of 32. And you'll see that now, instead of a triangle, we have something closer to a circle. Just change the points in the effect. Let's go ahead and move our playhead to, pardon me, 8 seconds. Page down or page up, and we'll create another outer radius keyframe. Let's just go ahead and increase this to its max value of 2000. So you'll notice that the effect is complete around here, 1113. But if we increase it all the way to 2000, the effect will end somewhere way out here on this keyframe, with the practical result being that the expansion happens faster in our actual composition than it would if we kept this exactly at the 1100 mark. Alright, so now you can see our dark gray solid 1 layer, iris wiping into the visuals layer below. And we'll basically just repeat this process with our visuals layer so that it will reveal our original composition again once we start looping it. And we'll just go ahead, set our playhead at 8 seconds. Perfect. Let's grab our visuals layer, apply that effect once again. Change its iris points to 32. Create an outer radius keyframe here at 8 seconds. Then we'll move our playhead to the end of our composition, all the way here at 12 seconds. Perfect. Change that outer radius once more to 2000. So now you can see we have our full animation loop. Now what we could do at this point, so it actually runs on a continuous loop, we could copy and paste all of these layers. And I just did that with Command C, Command V in case you're curious. Do that a couple times, match up all of the keyframes manually. Basically just create a ton of work for ourselves, end up with 30 layers over here, and just a real nasty, slow, ugly process. Or what we could do is take this entire composition that we just created and move it into a new composition. So we're going to go ahead, come up here to composition, new composition. We will call this one our main comp. And again, the only thing we'll change from here is its duration, which we will want to be 36 seconds instead of 12. Perfect, so now you'll see down here we have our main comp selected. We can still access our pre-comp if we click on it. But now we can use our pre-comp as a layer as we would any of these other footage layers. So I'm gonna go ahead, click and drag the pre-comp down into here. And then I'm going to copy and paste it, Command C, Command V, until I have 4 of them. Again, from here, I could manually drag all of these and time them the way I want, so I know that I want them all to be at about 8 second points from each other. Or I guess at about the 8 second mark with the other animations, but we can also do this with just a few simple clicks. So what we're going to do, what I'm going to have you do is shift select all of these. So click on the top layer, hold down shift, click on the bottom layer, and it does matter that you do the top layer first and the bottom layer last, and you'll see why here in a second. And then if you come up here to composition, excuse me, not composition, animation, goofball. Keyframe assistant, sequence layers. You'll check on overlap, and this will basically tell the program how much overlap you want between all of your layers. So since we want 8 seconds of the layer exposed, we want 4 seconds of overlap. I'll change this overlap to 4. Hit OK, and you can see that these are all spaced out exactly how I want them. I'll just show you actually, if we had shift selected from the bottom up, we'd get the opposite effect when we sequence layers. But we don't want that, and you'll see why. Abrupt change. Abrupt change. Oh. Let's go ahead. Redo that. Okay. And now you can see with just a few simple clicks on our keyframe assistant, we have our entire animation loop. Wonderful. So the last thing we need to do to get this up to par with the video I showed you at the beginning is add music. I imported this cellular upgrade by Equanimous. We saw Lion's remix earlier. I'm gonna go ahead and drop this into the bottom of the composition. And now, when I hit spacebar, you can hear it. And I changed the timing later so the lyrics would align exactly the way I wanted them to. And the way I did that is just by clicking and dragging this bar to the left and right, and basically just playing and messing around until I found the right audio segment. The other way you could do it is also, once again, just like open this individually, find the areas that you want, and come back to your main comp. I'm not going to worry about it too much. The important thing is that I have audio.
The light and love of divine healing.
And we have our entire animation. Now, before I sign off of this workshop, it's important that you guys know how to export your footage, how to render it. It's a little different than other Adobe programs. So you can, if you come up to File, Save As, this will just save the After Effects file. You'll see it's a .aep. You can't actually play a .aep on any media folders. A .aep saves all of your layers, all of the information, all of the work that you did within After Effects, but it's not gonna run like an MP4. You can't just click on your AEP file and have your project play. I'm not gonna worry about saving this because I already have a copy. But what I'm gonna do is export it, and you'll notice you can add it to the render queue. So After Effects has its own rendering software, but if you want to keep working on this as it's rendering, it's virtually impossible. The program will start lagging. So the best way to export, especially when you're using After Effects, and I would argue also Premiere, is to add your media to the Adobe Media Encoder queue. And what this does is it actually launches a separate Adobe software designed specifically for media encoding. And you'll see once this opens up. Another good thing about the media encoder, if you render within After Effects, it will automatically export as a .avi file, which is a massive file. You don't have the option to change it to an H.264 encoding or something like that, which is another benefit of doing your rendering inside of Adobe Media Encoder instead of within After Effects itself. Perfect. You don't have to worry about any of this. We should see the thing we want to render appear in here automatically. We did not. Let's try this again. File, export, add to Adobe Media Encoder. And now they're both here. Perfect. So we can actually just go ahead and let's just delete this one. So once we have this in here, basically the only two settings we really need to worry about are these two. This determines which kind of file it will be. H.264 is pretty much the industry standard. It's pretty small file size and you don't really lose much quality. The output file is where you name your composition and determine where it will be saved. So I'm going to call this final workshop product. Just save it straight on the scratch drive. And then when you hit play, you can see your little progress bar appear down here. And this should render pretty quickly. And then I will show you guys the final product once this is done. Alright, so now we're done. You can see if I open up my Finder and navigate to my scratch drive, that our final workshop product is in here.
The light and love of divine healing floods into you now.
And we have a final product virtually identical to the one that I showed you at the beginning of this tutorial. I will say one main difference that you might notice is that the colors in mine change. with each loop, and that's just because in my compositions I used some color correction effects, namely the lumetri color. I applied some looks. I applied some filters, and I basically just did that with all the different layers to get different colors on my loops, in case you're curious. Alright, so that does it for our Introduction to After Effects workshop with Studio Code. Once again, my name is Toby, and I'm grateful for you guys for joining me today. Hopefully you learned a lot, and I look forward to seeing you at the next workshop. Have a good one.